We choose to see the things that we see. That's not to say that reality isn't as it appears to be, but how we take that reality in is determined by the way that we choose to see the event that we're seeing. Which is why you can have 10 people witnessing a single event, say an accident on a street corner, and 10 different interpretations of what they saw. Because the mind colors what we've seen. So in a sense, we see what we've already decided to see, which is a powerful idea. In this week's Siddur, which is called Maasay, we are hearing about a recapitulation of all the journeys that the Jewish people took while they were wandering through the desert for 40 years. And we're told that there were 42 stops that they made along the way out of Egypt and ultimately into the Promised Land. 42 stops over 40 years is a lot of moves, a lot of moving about. When we think about moving in our own homes from one place to another, we may move 5 times in a lifetime. That's a lot. Or we move 10 times in a lifetime. That's a lot. To move in a lifetime 42 times, that's enormous. The people led a nomadic life while they were wandering through the desert, but again, it's the way that you choose to see things. The Midrash Tanchuma opens up this week's interpretation of the Siddur by saying that we are allowed to do things to preserve our own lives, even abrogating the Holy Shabbat. Why does it say this in the context of this Torah reading this week? Because our lives were in danger the whole time that we were enslaved in Egypt, when we were released from bondage, and when we were wandering through the desert. It wasn't simply aimless wandering through the Midbar, through the desert, but many times we were in grave danger and needed to do things to protect ourselves and to be protected in every single instance, not only by ourselves from our enemies, but by God as well. Because how many instances do we recount time and again throughout the book of Exodus and then into Leviticus and Numbers and even Deuteronomy? We hear about these times when the nation was besieged by terrible, ruthless opponents, and God saved us time and again. Which brings us to the next point. The next point that is highlighted by many of our sages, that when the Jewish people were wandering through the desert, it is as if one were to compare it, and this is again from the Midrash as well as quoted by Rashi in his commentary, it is as if there were a king whose son had been stricken with a terrible illness, and the king took his son to a doctor and didn't get a complete cure, and took him to another doctor, and took him to a hospital, and took him to a medicine man in a different area, took him to one place after another, and after a dizzying series of meetings with doctors and medicine men and people who have great wisdom, he finally got the son cured, got him whole. And when it was all over, the king took his son and said, "Do you remember when we went to this first place? And do you remember this doctor? Do you remember this medicine person?" And da da da. Every step along the path of their healing and their coming to wholeness matters. It's dictated to repeat these things because they are ingrained in one's consciousness out of love. And so it is that we rehearse all of the stories of the past, recalling the journeys of the Jewish people, these 42 stops along the path of the wilderness. But there's another insight as well. This one is from the master of the great name, the Baal Shem Tov, who says the 42 stops of the Jews in the wilderness were not 42 stops for them alone, but rather they were gradations of steps. He says, and gets this from the Talmud, that unlike angels that stand on a ladder on a specific rung for their entire existence, human beings stand on a ladder and they can go up or down. These 42 steps were 42 steps upward, la'ela, la'ela, as they grew in depth and understanding and spirituality closer to what God had intended them to be. So may it be, says the Baal Shem Tov for us, that wherever we are in our own personal midbar, in our own personal wandering through whatever desert we're in, It's important to take another step up the ladder, another rung, another step, another rung, and another step, because there's always the possibility that tomorrow can be brighter and we can be greater. These are our journeys, not just theirs. Shabbat Shalom.